There is a thing you can always tell, on any world, what's alive and what's carved. KHEMARIS took that away from us in about 4 hours. Right now, at the bottom of a canyon on the far side of the sky, there are 40 gods standing in 2 rows. Not one of them has moved in 60 years. A hand the size of a landing pad, wrapped in gold leaf, scaffolding lashed across the knuckles. Men 20 stories up on ropes, packing resin into a crack, the way a dentist fills a cavity, and about as gently. A jackal's jaw hanging over a temple roof, close enough that the priests keep the lamps low so nobody has to look at it straight on. And sunlight coming through the rim of an ear, all the way through, like light through a bottle. So how does something stand as a statue for 60 years and still be alive? And if it's alive, why did it stop talking? The people down there have been serving these things for 1,200 years. Not one of them, in all that time, has ever heard a god make a sound. We were on KHEMARIS for 3 days, and we found out why. This is what we found on KHEMARIS Prime, and we are still trying to understand it. Everything we learned down there only made the silence louder. We came in low, following a crack in the crust that ran to the horizon both ways. That's the whole world, really. One canyon. Limestone walls 300 meters up on either side, layered like pages in a book somebody dropped. At the bottom, a floor of black cracked silt about 4 kilometers across, and only a few hours of midday sun before the shade takes it back. Vance put us down on the silt. The Aurelia rides low and wide now. 2 hulls, flat deck, built to sit on soft ground and float if it has to. We didn't know yet how much that would matter. We landed next to a statue. 3 days later, it got thirsty. 90 meters, standing. A 30-story building with a head. And still, the top of it sits below the rim of the canyon. You're looking at a god, and there's another 200 meters of rock above it, and then a thin strip of sky. Everything on KHEMARIS is at the bottom of something. Okafor walked the length of one before any of us said a word. Then she called us over. No tool marks. Not a chisel scar, not a seam, not one correction. You don't carve 90 meters of stone and never miss. And the proportions were too right. The tendon behind the heel. The way the weight sat on the outside of the foot. Nobody sculpts that unless they're copying something. There was nothing here to copy. Then Vance came back from the base with the thermal and said the number twice because the first time nobody reacted. 4 degrees. The god was 4 degrees warmer than the rock it was standing on. Rock doesn't do that. So what were we standing under? The city answered before we did. It's built into the feet. Into them, literally. Temples and stairs and workhouses growing up between the toes like barnacles on a piling. Nobody here builds tall. Nobody builds anything that isn't either bolted to a god or cut into the canyon wall above a certain line. We found that line everywhere once we knew to look. A horizontal stain on the limestone, 70 meters up, running the length of the world. Every door in that city sits above it. They knew the water was coming back. They just didn't run. And they came out to look at us. Thousands of them, on the stairs and the rooftops and the scaffolds, packed shoulder to shoulder to see the small, loud thing that had landed in the middle of their gods. The tall ones came down first. 2.5 meters, thin as reeds, skin a wet gray-green that catches light like the inside of a shell. Their linen is soaked through, and every one of them carries a clay water jar strapped high on the back, where you'd carry air. the priests. On KHEMARIS, a priest is somebody who is never allowed to be dry. Under them, everywhere, were the Menders. Short, heavy in the shoulders, forearms glazed with a crust of resin they've stopped bothering to scrape off. They live on the scaffolds. Some are born up there. Their whole job, their life, their father's life, and his father's, is to find every crack that opens on a god's body and seal it. They were kind to us. They fed us. They laughed at Sato for being scared of the rope. And they sang while they worked. All of them, all day, this low rolling thing that never quite stopped. Remember that they were singing. It comes back. We went up the way a mender goes up, which is badly, on knotted rope with a bucket. 60 meters over the temple roofs, on a plank lashed against the ribs of something we'd been told to call a god. Up close, the skin isn't smooth. It has a grain. It has that faint diamond crosshatch you see on the back of your own hand. The gold leaf is pressed on in sheets over the chest and shoulders, and where it's peeled, you can see what's underneath. Something clear and clouded and deep, like amber. Like a bottle you can't quite see through. The light doesn't stop at the surface. It goes in a few centimeters and gets lost. Okafor put her hand flat on it and stood there long enough that Reyes asked her twice if she was okay. Then she took the scraper off a mender's belt and lifted the edge of a resin patch, and nobody stopped her because we all wanted to see. Under the patch, there was skin, pores, actual pores spaced wide as coins because everything here is scaled up. And the crack the resin had been covering was weeping. A dark line of damp seeping out of a god that hadn't moved since before anyone alive down there was born. It wasn't a statue. It had never been a statue. It was drying out. And 20 stories below, 10,000 people were praying to it. The mender took his scraper back, not angry, and packed the crack shut again. Sealed it, smoothed it, went back to singing. That was the first time it occurred to me we might be watching something terrible, and everybody involved was being very gentle about it. There were animals on the scaffolds with us. Flat-bodied, about the size of a coyote, 6 legs, mouths like a wood chisel. They come up the ropes at night, scrape the loose flakes off the gods, and eat them. A whole species living off the dead skin of something too big to notice them. They stopped mattering to us until the 3rd day, when every single one of them left. Straight up the canyon wall in the same hour. Animals know things about water that people have to be told. Here's the question we couldn't put down. If the gods were alive, and by then Okafor would have fought you over it, why was nobody on this planet surprised? The priests weren't hiding it. There was nothing to hide. They wash them, they oil the joints, they mend the cracks. The whole civilization is a maintenance crew. And you don't maintain a god, you maintain a machine, or an animal, or a patient. So what did they think they were doing? The answer was in the wall. They let Sato into the nilometer because Sato asks in a way that's hard to refuse. It's a well cut straight down into the limestone, with a spiral stair around the inside and no rail, because whoever cut it did not care about you. Every course of stone on the way down is carved. It's a calendar, and it goes back 10,000 years, a line for each time the water came. It took Sato about 20 minutes on that stair to find the number that broke the planet open for us. 60 years. The floods come 60 years apart, which means the priest reading that wall has never seen one. It's a job you inherit and die out of. You spend your whole life keeping a schedule for an event you will never personally witness. And whoever reads that wall decides everything. When to plant, what to store, who eats. Power on KHEMARIS isn't an army, it's knowing a date. But that's not what stopped Sato. Further down, older stone, cruder cuts, there's a second column running alongside the flood marks. They'd been keeping 2 records, and the priests couldn't tell us what the second one was, because nobody has cut a mark in that column for 1,200 years. Okafor got it from the pictogram. It's an open mouth. The old column was for the season the gods sang. There it is, going back 9,000 years. Every flood, and beside it, a mouth. They sang, they sang, they sang. Then, 1,200 years ago, the column just stops. The floods keep coming. The marks keep getting cut. The mouths never appear again. So we ask the obvious thing. What happened 1,200 years ago? And the priest, calm, proud, told us that was when the Menders were founded. That was when his people finally learned to love their gods properly. That was the year they started sealing the cracks. We should have kept our mouths shut. We didn't. Okafor went back up with the scraper, and this time a priest saw her do it. You have never seen a city move like that. Nobody hit us, nobody drew anything. It was worse. It was 10,000 people deciding at the same moment that you are unclean. They walked us out, put us on the switchback trail, and marched us up the canyon wall, past the water line, all the way to the rim. Reyes didn't argue. We'd opened a wound on a god in front of the people whose entire lives are spent closing them. They left us on the rim at midday, in the sun, in the dead country, which is exactly where they'd already put everybody else who'd figured it out. The dry ones live up there. They're the same species. That's the part that takes a second. But their skin is cracked into plates like the floor of a dead lake, and at the elbows, at the collarbone, there are patches gone clear, clouded, amber. You can hold a hand up to the sun and see the shape of the bone inside. They're going the same way the gods went, on purpose, over a lifetime. Down in the canyon they call them filth. Up here they sat us in the shade and gave us water. An old one did the talking. She'd been a mender for 30 years before she quit. She said, "You've seen the cracks. Did you listen to one?" Sato said number. She said, "Then go at dawn, before anyone patches it. Put your ear on it." The dry ones have their own way down, a chimney the priest gave up watching a long time ago. She took us an hour before light, and what's underneath is so simple it's almost cruel. When the sun comes up, the outside of a body that big warms before the inside does. The shell expands. The air trapped in the cracks expands faster. And a crack in a wall of dry tissue 90 meters tall with a column of air behind it is not a crack. It's a reed. It's a throat. At dawn on KHEMARIS, before the heat evens out, every open crack on every god sings. One long note, and then it's gone as the temperature settles. That's it. That's the miracle. Thermodynamics and a hole. We know it's real because we did it to ourselves. There's a statue on Earth, in Egypt, that an earthquake cracked 2,000 years ago. After that, it sang at sunrise, and people sailed across the Mediterranean to stand in the dark and wait for it. Then a Roman emperor decided to be generous and repaired it, filled the cracks, made it whole. It has never made a sound since. 1,200 years ago, someone on KHEMARIS decided the cracks were wounds, and out of nothing but love, they founded an order to close every one of them. They're a religion of people who spend their lives on ropes, in the heat, hands sealing the mouths of their gods shut. And they sing while they do it. That's why they sing. Nobody up there knows why anymore. It's just what you do on the scaffold. It's the shape of a sound that stopped 1,200 years ago, passed down mender to mender, getting further from the original every generation. They've been humming the ghost of their god's voice into the gag they're holding in place. Then she showed us the palms. You can't see it from the ground. From the rim, at the right hour, with the light raking across, you can. Down in every open hand, in the amber, there's a mark. 6 of them now. 6 worlds. We've seen that shape on a temple wall on Erexus, cut into a titan's bones on Therion, running on a machine on Veltharos, stamped in a dome on Aldraine, set into the base of a lighthouse on Nocthera. Every other time, somebody had drawn it, worshipped it, built it into something. This is the first time we found it in skin. Nobody carved this one. It was put on them. And then the silt got damp. We felt it before Vance's instruments said anything. The flake eaters were already gone. The priest started singing, and this time the whole canyon did it, and it was not the Mender song. 60 years, on schedule, to the day the wall said. You could hear it coming down the gorge for 20 minutes before you could see it. Not a wave, just the sound a very large room makes when it starts to fill. Reyes got us onto a shoulder, not the ship, not the rim, the nearest god, straight up the scaffold, 80 meters, everybody climbing. The water came in brown and green and heavy with silt, and it kept coming, and the temples went under, and the scaffolds went under, and that stain on the canyon wall stopped being a stain and started being a promise. 70 meters. It stopped 10 meters under our boots, right at the stain, exactly where the wall said it would. And that's when Okafor started laughing, soaking wet, because she'd finally worked it out. Nothing that big can walk. That's not a rule about KHEMARIS, that's a rule about everywhere. Double the height of an animal and you get 4 times the bone to stand on, but 8 times the weight to hold up. The math turns on you fast. The biggest things that ever walked on Earth were already at the edge of what bone can do, and they were a fraction of this. 90 meters standing on land isn't a big animal. It's a building that would crush itself. Unless it isn't standing on land. A blue whale in open water carries almost none of its own weight. The water takes 95% of it. The gods of KHEMARIS were never built to walk on a planet. They were built to walk in a flood. The resin went first. 1,200 years of patches all over the body, popping loose in strips as the tissue underneath took on water and swelled. And every patch that came off opened a throat. 40 gods, chest deep, every crack on every one of them coming open at once in moving air for the first time in 12 centuries. It came in low and enormous, and you felt it in the water before you heard it. 40 voices in a stone canyon 4 kilometers wide with nothing to absorb it. And it was the Mender song, the real one, the one they'd been humming wrong on the ropes for 1,200 years, sung the way it was meant to be sung, by the thing it came from. Every Mender in that flood was hearing the original for the first time. Their fathers never heard it. Neither did the men who taught their fathers. Some of them were still holding buckets. Then the head came around. I was maybe 10 meters from the eye when it opened, and the eye is not something I've found words for yet. It's bigger than the Aurelia. You don't perceive it as an eye, you perceive it as weather. And it looked down. Rhea said afterwards she was sure, completely sure, it was looking at us. It wasn't. It looked through us. We were 4 wet animals on a shoulder. We did not register. It looked up, at one point in the sky, and held there. Then, all down the canyon, one after another, the other 39 did the same. 40 gods, chest deep in a flood that comes once in a lifetime, turning their heads to the same empty spot. And the singing stopped, all at once, mid-note. 10,000 people in the water below us, screaming, and they were not screaming with joy. Sato had the bearing before I got my feet under me. It's the same line Nocthra called down, the same direction we've been flying since we left it. 2 worlds, no contact, half a sky apart, pointing at the same spot. The old woman had come down onto the shoulder with us. She watched them do it and said it almost bored, like she'd known since she was a girl. They're not bowing. They're checking if it's gone. And then they started to dry, in the middle of the flood, in 70 meters of water. The skin went pale and hard from the shoulders down. The eye clouded like a window fogging from the wrong side. The hand opened, locked, stopped. They had 60 years of water in front of them. They took about 6 minutes of it and put themselves back, because they'd looked, and whatever they were checking for hadn't gone. That's what the dormancy is. It was never a season, it was never devotion, and it was never sleep. They go still because still is how you survive something that finds you by movement. 40 of the largest living things we have ever stood next to, holding their breath for 1,200 years in a hole in the ground, under gold leaf and resin applied by people who thought they were helping.
This isn't even exotic. There are animals on Earth that dump 99% of the water in their bodies, shut down every process that makes them technically alive, and wait. Decades, if they have to. Then the water comes back, and so do they. The trick is that the body turns to glass, not stone, glass. Everything inside locks in place exactly where it was and stops. Which is why the sunlight goes through the rim of the ear. You're not looking at a carving. You're looking at something that made itself into a window so it could survive being seen. And we've done the other half too. In 1969, in a hospital in the Bronx, there were people who'd been frozen in place for 40 years. Same posture, eyes fixed, since an epidemic in the 20s. A doctor gave them a drug and they woke up, talked, walked, knew their families. Then the drug stopped working, and one by one they went back. That's on our record. That happened to us. The water carried the Aurelia out. That's why Vance built her the way he did. We floated over the drowned temples. The last thing we saw was the Menders, already back on the ropes, in the water, in the dark, feeling along the shoulders of a god for the cracks that had opened while it was awake, sealing them, making it whole. They'll have every one shut before the flood goes down, and in 60 years, some Mender's great-grandson will be up there humming a song he can't explain, holding the resin steady with both hands. A gag from a friend is still cover. That's the thing I can't put down. We've been broadcasting into the dark for 100 years, constantly, cheerfully, on every frequency we can build. It has never once occurred to us that the right move might be to stop moving. They held their breath for 1,200 years. We showed up, and 3 days later they let it out. 40 voices in a canyon for about 6 minutes. Then they looked at the sky and put themselves straight back into the glass. We're flying that bearing now, the one they checked, the one Nocthra called down.
Because there's a question none of us has said out loud, and Sato won't stop chewing on it. They stopped hiding just long enough to make a sound. Who heard it? We left KHEMARIS Prime behind, but it did not leave us. Somewhere ahead, another world is waiting, and the Aurelia is already moving toward it. If you want to travel with us aboard the Aurelia, subscribe. A new world every week.